Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Today's session for the trial of former Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein was adjourned and will resume tomorrow. The trial's atmosphere was tense as the defense team walked out, accusing the court of illegitimacy and failure of taking necessary measures and arrangements to provide security and protection for the lawyers.
Amidst a state of tension, the third session for the trial of former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein and 7 co-defendants convened today to discuss their roles in the Dajjal massacre, where 184 people had been killed. The court heard from the first witness, Ahmad Hassan Mohammed. An argument ensued between Saddam's stepbrother, a defendant in this case, and the witness, who exchanged blames and criticism. The court reconvened after adjourning for 1 hour and a half due to strong arguments by the defense team, who said that the court does not have legitimacy over the case and that it failed to take enough security measures to guarantee lawyers' safety. The former President Saddam Hussein objected to the resumption of his and his co-defendants' trial in light of the walking out of their lawyers. The defense team called on the court to allow the former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark and former Qatari Minister of Justice Najib Naimi to address the court. The 2 former ministers who took the stand in the second trial session criticized the court of lacking the legitimacy and jurisdiction over the case and of failing to take enough security measures to provide protection for the lawyers.
Is this the justice you are talking about? Why do you not allow the defendant to tell the court and the people his concerns and points of view?
Your Honor, allow me to speak.
We do allow everybody to talk and present his concerns.
Until now, we have not yet completed discussions of court formalities.
We advise you that the court is legitimate and legally binding. We have talked about this issue many times. You, Mr. Khalil, need to prepare your written briefings. The foreman of the 5-judge panel of Saddam's trial, Raskar Amin, rejected defense requests, confirming the court is legitimate, legal, and was formed by the Iraqi National Assembly. And if defense lawyers quit, the court will appoint another panel of attorneys.
We open with a suicide bombing at the Sharon shopping mall in Natanya this morning. 5 people were killed and more than 50 injured, among them 4 seriously, when an Islamic Jihad terrorist detonated an explosive device at the entrance to the mall. Steve Leibowitz brings us the details in this report.
The relative calm of recent weeks was shattered at 11:30 this morning when the suicide bomber blew himself up at the entrance to the Hasharon Mall in Natanya. Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for the attack and identified the bomber as 21-year-old Lufti Amin Abu Salam from the village of Kafar Rai in the West Bank, between Jenin and Tulkarem. Israeli officials blamed the Palestinian Authority for failure to dismantle the terrorist groups in the territories.
I think it's clear to everyone that as long as these extremist terrorist groups remained armed, they will continue to kill innocent civilians and kill the chance for peace, to kill the chance of moving forward. The Palestinian Authority has promised, not just Israel, it's promised the entire international community that it will start to disarm these groups, to take the guns away from these extremist elements, and unfortunately, little has been achieved. We urge the Palestinian Authority to follow through on its commitment to disarm these killers.
If not for alert security guards, the result could have been much worse. The bomber was approaching the entrance to the mall, but was prevented from entering. According to Police Chief Moshe Karadi, the bomber was identified by police and a security guard some 15 meters in front of the mall. Police managed to keep him from the entrance, and the suicide bomber then blew himself up when police approached him to search his bags. Members of the security forces were hurt in the blast, and Karadi said that the action of the guards and police prevented a much more deadly bombing. Security officials say that there had been no specific warning ahead of the attack. Following the blast, police set up roadblocks and patrols in sensitive areas around the country and raised the alert level nationwide.
Joining me now in the studio to discuss Israel's response to today's suicide bombing is Dr. Renan Giesing, Senior Advisor to the Prime Minister. Dr. Giesing, thanks for coming in this evening. Despite continued Palestinian promises and pressure from the Americans and from the Israeli side, once again a Palestinian terror activity.
Well, it's most regrettable that after 3 months after the disengagement, when there were high hopes that the Palestinians would finally take control of the situation as they had the opportunity to take control of their lives, they missed another opportunity. I think those who suffer most of all from this are the Palestinian people. We know how to fight terrorism, and we know, and I had no illusion that after disengagement we will still have to fight terrorism. We'll still have these kind of suicide bombing. But nothing has been done on the Palestinian side in order to indicate to the population that they're moving in a different direction, that they're steering the Palestinian society to a new horizon, to a different destiny. And that's why you have continuing effort by Islamic Jihad and other organizations supported today by outside forces like Iran and Hezbollah. And we have to take the necessary steps to stop it.
With all due respect, all the necessary steps that we seem to be taking, we continue to give and give and give to the Palestinian side, and in return, terror attacks, continued terror attacks.
Well, I think we make...
What is Israel doing?
Right. We're making a clear separation between what I would say, the easing of restriction and humanitarian aid that we're trying to provide the Palestinian society in order to leave the door open, to show them that there is a different way. At the same time, we will have to increase our efforts and intensify our sustained operations against terrorists. There's an illusion here, as if we didn't have any terrorist activity because they decided not to act or the Palestinians stopped them. We have been able to scuttle 9 out of 10 of all suicide bombing. So one succeeded. Now the question is what will happen? We will have to pay house call to those Palestinians who instigate and perpetrate acts of terror, whether they belong to Islamic Jihad or to Hamas, and bring them to justice or bring justice to them.
Islamic Jihad confirmed that the Natanya martyrdom operation came as a response to the Israeli occupation's aggressive policies against Palestinians and its assassination strategies against Palestinian leaders. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority condemned the operation, confirming that it is against the interests of the Palestinian people.
As has been the case in many of the martyrdom operations, the Palestinian Authority condemned this latest suicide attack, vowing to pursue the responsible party behind it. Despite the condemnation by Palestinian officials, Israel strongly and quickly blamed the Palestinian Authority and its policymakers for such an attack. The Palestinian President and the Interior Minister, who were in a meeting with American officials, strongly condemned the Natanya operation and vowed to pursue the perpetrators.
The timing of the operation is very bad, and it is against Palestinian interests. This comes as Palestinians are preoccupied with the cooling off period and the elections. This operation is definitely not in the interest of the Palestinian people.
The Palestinian Authority is in an awkward situation. On one hand, it realizes that Israel's policy and its aggression against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank are the main reasons that triggered the Natanya operation. On the other hand, as a result of the international pressure, the Palestinian Authority feels obligated to put an end to these operations, which are against the interests of the Palestinian people.
We are following up on the situation, and we have orders from our political leaders to enforce the law, restore public order and security, and combat any activity that may interfere with Palestinians' interests or may hurt our cause.
While the Palestinian Authority condemned the operation, Palestinian factions and groups, including the military wing of the Fatah movement, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, hailed and approved the operation. They confirmed that it is a natural response to Israel's continuous aggression against Palestinians. In a press conference in the Gaza Strip, Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for the Natanya operation.
We hereby claim responsibility for this unique martyrdom operation, which comes in the framework of our responses to the Zionists' crimes against our people and our freedom fighters, especially the assassination of our martyred leader, Luay al-Saadi.
العملية الجديدة بمقاييسها المختلفة تحمل صفعة لشارون واستراتيجيته الأمنية.
This martyrdom operation comes as a setback for Sharon's security strategy, especially since the suicide bomber had infiltrated the separation wall in its military zones. This wall, which Sharon had made a priority in his election campaign, has proven to be unsecured after all. After every suicide operation, many critics tried to read between the lines to find out who is responsible. However, the Natanya martyrdom attack was different, because the Islamic Jihad, which will not take part in the upcoming elections in the occupied territories, had claimed full responsibility for the attack.
Amidst the crisis in the French suburbs, another controversy emerged in France regarding the way school history books portray the French military's role during the colonial period. The right wing is demanding that history books portray the colonization period in a positive light, complying with the law passed by the French Parliament.
The impacts of French colonization in Algeria and every land it occupied are not negative. This is what the French Parliament decided upon and passed a law saying that historians must teach the positive aspects of these images and what the French colonization did over the 130 years of occupation in Algeria and other countries. In Parliament, right-wing members do not hesitate to accuse school history books of lessening the dignity of the French military and ignoring the tragedies of the Algerians who helped the colonization, as well as the French colonizers, who form a significant constituent that usually demand respect for their role in the colonial era.
The idea is that our school books present our colonial history in unacceptable and embarrassing ways and give incomplete facts. They mention some facts, leave out others, and forge history. The goal is not to rewrite history. It is ironic that the left is demanding an end to this law, because it is the same left that was defending the colonization at the time.
Since the crisis in the suburbs, the French right wing is further polarizing to appeal to the supporters of right-wing extremists who uphold this law. These policies, in addition to the measures introduced to tighten restrictions on immigrants and foreigners, makes this situation appear as though Election Day were tomorrow.
It is not an ideological matter to teach our students that 1/3 of the Algerian population disappeared in the first quarter of the century due to the French occupation.
The right wing is in a state of cultural and mental regression.
The left wing failed in nullifying the law that poisons the French-Algerian relations, which means that the apology demanded by Algeria from France will not be possible.
There will never ever be an apology from our side. I say this clearly. We will not apologize about our history. That is the reality.
Since the crisis in the suburbs and the confrontations with the Arab, Muslim, and African youth, who are descendants of French former colonies, the inclination towards revenge finds increasing support among a large portion of the right-wing French, who until today cannot accept France's defeat in Algeria and other colonies. This exposes their desperate desire to rewrite history according to their perspective, but this time backed by the law.
The remains of 30 bodies discovered Saturday in a mass grave excavations near a former Syrian intelligence facility in Anjar were transferred to Beirut yesterday for DNA testing. The excavations continued in the search for another mass grave believed to be in the same area, and the number of bodies was expected to increase. Mefawaz has the story.
Security sources said the remains were found inside gunny sacks and included human skulls, underwear, and vestiges of one military uniform. After a cursory look at the bones, one forensic pathologist said the people appeared to have died several years ago, probably 12 years, but he was unable to speculate on the cause. The findings were seemingly linked to Syria's 29-year military presence, which ended in April. Lebanese internal security forces said in a statement, residents of the eastern area of Anjar had led them to the unmarked graves, and that a forensic doctor was appointed to uncover the remains, which were placed in plastic bags and sent to the laboratories for DNA tests and identification. The mayor of the nearby town of Majd al-Anjar, who helped lead security forces to the graves, said he believed up to 40 bodies were buried in the area near a hilltop Muslim shrine. He told Reuters that the bodies had been buried near the shrine of Nabi Uzair since 1993, adding that he had known about it since 1999 but kept silent due to Syria's tight grip over the country. Ghazi Aad, an official from the support of Lebanese in detention and exile, visited Anjar Sunday and demanded an international investigation to find out the truth about the identity of those buried in mass graves. Aad told reporters he was satisfied with the opening of a Lebanese judicial inquiry, but added that the case presented a humanitarian matter that must not be obstructed, stressing that all those whom the Syrians detained used to pass through Anjar and be tortured, and those who died under torture were buried near the Onion Factory prison. It is believed that Syria still holds hundreds of Lebanese in its prisons. Syria, in turn, reacted to the discovery of the mass graves through the internet site Syria News. Sources said the Fatah CR of Abu Nidal was the perpetrator of the mass graves, pointing that members of this group performed many executions between 1986 and 1990, killing around 400 people for their alleged membership in foreign intelligence services, namely the Mossad. The same sources said that a number of the people executed by Abu Nidal were buried in North Lebanon at Mount Tirbul and in West Sidon at Mount Sharhabil.
Media reports now say the head of the UN probe into the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri was likely going to stay on the job, contradicting earlier claims that Mehlis intended to leave the investigation by the end of the year. Mehlis returned to Lebanon yesterday from Paris, as the 5 Syrian officials were in Austria, where their lawyers, as their interrogations began this morning at the UN headquarters in Vienna. They are to wrap up on Wednesday. In Damascus, the Sana news agency reported Justice Minister Mohammed al-Ghafari as saying the UN team aimed at closing in on Syria and destroying its position on the international arena. Natanya has the latest developments.
It was not official, but Detlef Mehlis showed no sign of staying on the job once his mandate ends on January 1st. The head of the UN probe into the February
We seem to have had some technical problems. A car which was seized from the garage of Regional Secretary of Syria's El Baath Party, Qasem Council's building, was undergoing similar procedures to the one used in the failed assassination attempt against Marwan Hamidi in October of last year. Lebanese security sources told the Kuwaiti daily Al-Ra'y Al-Am the car, a 1987 Mercedes, had several times been subject to illegal color and plate number changes. Investigations revealed that the procedures of the plate numbers and engine changes were exactly the same made to the car used in the assassination attempt of Telecommunication Minister Hamidi, as well as the one used in the assassination of former Minister Elia Hbeia in 2002. According to the daily, investigations would continue until the main source behind the equipment of cars with explosives was found.
The American President George Bush was compelled to increase the number of public speeches defending his reasons for continuing the war in Iraq. This comes amidst increased calls by Americans and members of Congress to bring the troops home. After 2.5 years of fighting in Iraq, the American people have voiced their doubts that their president has a clear strategy to deal with the political situation in Iraq. While Bush was compelled to accept the withdrawal of his troops, he argues that the pullout will not be soon and will only be partial. It will not happen until the Iraqi forces are ready to run their own affairs and when the U.S. achieves victory in the so-called war on terrorism.
George Bush, who ignored the majority of his people, defied the United Nations, and flew in the face of world opinion by dragging them into a war in the fall of 2003, is now looking for a way out without being defeated. Now, for example, he is willing to negotiate with the Iraqi armed groups, and he is not embarrassed to deal with Iran. He is looking for a victory which has become very hard to achieve. After 2.5 years of the war in Iraq, Bush can no longer ignore the mounting local pressures on him, as the American people continue to see more coffins of dead soldiers coming home, and amidst the increase in the level of violence and attacks on the American forces. Americans are more certain than ever that the White House does not have a clear strategy in Iraq. 2,100 American soldiers have been killed and 16,000 injured since the beginning of the invasion. However, victory has not been achieved, and the U.S. and the world are not any more safe than before. Needless to say, way Iraq had not been transferred into a secure, democratic, and a free nation, as Bush had been saying throughout his war campaign. Many Americans are opposing the war more than ever. Many war protesters demonstrated in the streets, calling on Bush to bring the troops home. Meanwhile, many Democratic congressmen called for an immediate withdrawal of U.S. forces. However, George Bush, who received the message loud and clear, appeared as if he did not want to bow to pressures. In his speech, Mr. Bush defended his war policy, stressing the importance of keeping a U.S. military presence in Iraq. He confirmed that an early withdrawal is a big mistake because the U.S. has not completely defeated its enemies in Iraq.
قرر أن الانسحاب الفوري إذا ما تم فسيكون خطأ جسيما ورهيبا ما دامت الولايات المتحدة لم تهزم أعداءها نهائيا في العراق.
I am interested in victory. I want to defeat the terrorists. I want to bring our troops home. However, I cannot bring them back without achieving victory. And we do not have a clear strategy for achieving victory.
The strategy of the Bush administration is based on training the Iraqi forces until they are capable of taking over the security responsibility. Thousands of Iraqi soldiers, police officers, and SWAT teams have graduated so far, and the political process is moving forward, especially as the upcoming legislative elections with the participation of the Sunni Arabs are approaching. The Americans are changing their tactics. For example, they are willing to negotiate with armed Iraqi groups, and the American ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad had a meeting with Iranian officials asking Iran to help in stopping the violence. It is obvious that the Americans finally understand that they are the problem, not only the solution as previously believed. The fact that the White House and other senior American and Iraqi officials announced that Washington will withdraw part of its forces from Iraq next year means that Bush has accepted the pullout, which he had rejected all along. However, his determination to crush the insurgency, which has proven to be resilient, indicates that the Iraqi war still has a long way to go.
Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani says the upcoming Iran-EU talks will mainly focus on the fact that there is no diversion in Iran's uranium enrichment project. Iran's top nuclear negotiator told reporters Monday that it is after constructive, logical, and serious negotiations with Europe, stressing the talks would be a win-win game for both sides. It will be a win game for Iran, Larijani added, as it can have the uranium enrichment project on its own and win a game for the European side, since, as he added, they will be reassured there is no diversion in Iran's enrichment trend. Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency is urging Tehran and the European Troika to exert self-restraint over Iran's nuclear case. The IAEA chief told the British Daily Independent on Monday the current circumstances would benefit no side in the standoff. This comes as India and Russia are both calling for resolving of Iran's nuclear dilemma. Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has voiced his opposition against referral of Iran's nuclear case to the UN Security Council. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also voiced Moscow's support for resumption of Iran-EU talks. However, as he stressed, his country will not act as a mediator. He added, quote, "We will continue our parallel efforts." The United States said Monday it will raise Russia's sale of a missile defense system to Iran, with Moscow saying the deal is unhelpful for the region. U.S. State Department spokesman Adam Early said, quote, "We certainly don't feel that this is a sale that would serve the interests of us or the region." Russia's defense minister Sergei Ivanov had stated that the arms deal would not, quote, "change the balance of forces in the region." 15 Iranians and Iraqi Kurds received €680 in damages each for injuries suffered by the chemical bombings of the ousted Saddam Hussein's army in the 80s. The amount was awarded during a court hearing on Monday for Dutch chemicals trader Frans van Anrot, who is on trial for supplying ingredients used by Saddam's regime in gas attacks on Kurdish towns. The victim's lawyer told the Hague court the amount is not in proportion with the victim's sufferings and should be considered as symbolic. Third session of trial of Iraqi former President Saddam Hussein on Monday saw the first witness take stand at the trial and testify with harrowing details of a massacre in the Shiite village Al-Dujail in 1982. Ahmad Mohammad Hassim al-Dujaili gave his testimony and testified to the mass arrest of residents and the murder of his neighbors. Meanwhile, Saddam said he is not afraid of being executed when witnesses at his trial described the horrors of his rule, including use of a human meat grinder. The session reached its climax when former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark and Qatari former Justice Minister, currently Saddam's defense lawyers, left the court, but after 10 minutes, the court resumed its work. The chief judge then adjourned the trial until Tuesday.
The Metkesh Wilde Association held an educational session on sexual abuse and assaults on children. The meeting was attended by a number of victims' families. Here is Salma Mihawad and Hamid Sadni in the following report. Abdullah Kuwai, the father of an 11-year-old disabled boy who was sexually abused 6 months ago, and Najah Deeb of the Metkesh Wilde Association visited the victim at the hospital where he is receiving medical care. The victim is partially paralyzed and was unable to fend off his attacker.
My son was sexually assaulted by a 43-year-old man who was caring for him and 3 other children at the time. I do not know why he did this to my son, knowing that nobody, including the pedophile himself, likes this done to his own child.
Abdullah Kuwai came face to face with the perpetrator, who was walking freely in the streets. As a result, the father took it upon himself to expose the crime.
The person who raped my son was roaming around the neighborhood. He did not show any remorse. I'm worried about the safety of other children. The suspect should be ashamed to show his face in the neighborhood and of the horrible crime he committed.
We should not be quiet about these crimes, and you children should not be quiet either. We must report any obscene acts. Are you with me, kids? You should not be quiet. You must speak out.
Mr. Kuwai attended this educational session on child sexual abuse. He also met with Ms. Najah Deeb and several members of the Metkesh Wilde Association. Victims' mothers were overwhelmed by emotion. Fatima al-Zahra, a victim's mother, told the horrible tale of her 14-year-old handicapped daughter who was raped by Fatima's brother-in-law.
The perpetrator, who is my brother-in-law, was always welcomed in my house. I used to invite him over for dinner and cook his favorite food. When I was away or sick, he used to take care of my daughter, and he raped her. If someone asks you to go with him, what will you do? Of course I will not go with him. I do not know him, and I don't trust strangers. If he tries to touch me, I will scream.
In this meeting, many victims' families offered their testimonies and counselors gave them advice. Attendees instructed these children to report and expose any sexual advances or obscene acts committed against them.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.